shall we start with you? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar to explore the journey from rigorous research to the publication of a scholarly book with one of our prolific scholars and author here at Open Global University, Dr. Nehinpao Kipjan, and Senior Commissioning Editor of Routledge, Mr. Akash Chakraborty. For those of you who don't know very well Professor Kipjan's scholarly work, let me now introduce both the author and the publisher with both of you. Dr. Nehinpao Kipjan is Associate Professor and Assistant Dean and Executive Director of Center for Southeast Asian Studies at Opijindal Global University School of International Affairs. Dr. Kipjan has published 4 books, 3 book chapters, 2 book reviews, and 22 peer-reviewed academic articles in social research, international studies, world affairs, Journal of Asian and African Studies, Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs, Ethnopolitics, Strategic Analysis, South Asia Research, Indian Journal of Political Science, Economic and Political Weekly, Asian Profile, Asian Affairs, International Journal on World Peace, and India Review. He has also published over 210 articles in various leading international newspapers and magazines in 5 continents: Asia, Africa, Australia, Europe, and North America. Nehin Pao, I'm really glad that you have decided to share your journey with all of us here. Welcome and good evening to you. The second guest for this evening is actually Nehin Pao's publisher, Mr. Akash Chakraborty. Mr. Akash Chakraborty is Senior Commissioning Editor at Routledge, Taylor and Francis Group. He has about 14 years experience in the publishing industry, having worked with leading trade and academic publishers. He has an overarching interest in history, sociology, and literature, and is presently focusing on politics and public policy, social exclusion, and migration studies. Today's webinar is being co-hosted by the Center for Comparative and Global Education under the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building here at Opijindal Global University, and the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, which is headed by Professor Nehinpao Kipjan. Nehinpao, my first question to you on behalf of the audience today and on behalf of all of us is there's something totally connected to your area of research, your expertise and specialization. We all know that you are an expert in Southeast Asian studies, that region, and also your research involves researching on a lot of issues of conflict with regards to international relations in this particular region. Very sensitive and sometimes highly controversial kind of topics. But those of us who have read your work, we know that you have really done extensive ethnographic field work in these regions. You have interviewed policymakers, diplomats, and politicians in the Southeast Asia region on very sensitive issues and topics. And those of us who do ethnography, we know that it's not really easy to actually study up. To interview people who are in such powerful positions in policymaking. We would really like to know from you how you have gone about making appointments with such important people, doing their interviews, and sometimes also asking them questions about very controversial issues. Nehinpao, could you please enlighten us about it? Our student researchers would really learn from your experience.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Musumi Mukherjee. First of all, I would like to thank you to you as well as your colleague, Professor Tatania, and also the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building for organizing this event. And also would like to thank my friend Akash from Routledge for joining us for this session. And are looking forward to his presentation in a few minutes from now. Yeah, coming to your question, indeed, it is very, very interesting as well as very challenging to question or to try to interview people of high caliber. In fact, before I say that, uh, this is the second book I have published with Routledge. In my first book, which I published with Routledge, was Democratization of Myanmar, where I interviewed several policymakers, politicians, scholars, and activists. One among them was the former Prime Minister of Myanmar, who was instrumental in, let's say, the democratization process in Myanmar. It was very difficult. Many were surprised that I was able to get access to him or able to talk to him. Similarly, in my second book with Routledge, I traveled to Singapore, Indonesia, and Philippines, where I interviewed scholars, ambassadors, and other government officers and academics. But there are a few things that I would like to share regarding how we approach. First of all, we need to be patient as a researcher because we would like to get something out of those people who are directly involved or who have direct knowledge about the issue that we are working on. Because that means that you have to look at their schedule, not necessarily your own. Of course, you would have to present them your timeline, your type of questions that you would like to ask, and the purpose, the main purpose of your meeting them. Because some people are skeptical or suspicious whether it is politically motivated or if there is a vested interest or idea behind this book. But one advantage for academics or scholars is that since we are doing purely on academic, let's say, perspective, they are not suspecting us for some other political regions. That's one advantage as a scholar, as an academic. But again, coming back to my first point, we need to look at their schedule and present them our timeline and the time and the date, or let's say the month that we would like to meet them. And once they get back to you, they would say yes. I mean, some of them all outrightly reject your proposal because it either contradicts with their schedule or they are not interested in meeting you, or because the topic is so contentious or so, let's say, so critical or so what we call sensitive. But again, it is a combination of your hard work, your, let's say, insistence, as well as, what is it, your passion. Because if you really love to do what you want to do, if you really want to achieve something that you would love to do, you have to somehow try to accommodate the interest and the time and the availability of those people who are at high level or high positions. So again, I would suggest, or I would encourage or advise the young scholars or the young researchers to uh, go for this kind of data collection, because anybody for some reason can do library based research, because you just go and sit in a library and then work on a secondary data. But for me as a scholar, as someone who is deeply, let's say, engaged in what we call ethnographic study, or let's say interviews, I find that getting first information, or let's say primary data, is essential to producing a quality work. Because if your work is purely based on secondary data, I think the quality of that book or the value of that book might be little less valued or less appreciated than if you have primary data, or let's say if you are directly talking to people who are in the field and who have direct knowledge or insider knowledge, if you will. So again, coming back to your question, I think it is difficult, but it is not impossible. But you have to be patient. You have to have the patience, and you have to have the commitment and dedication. And then present your proposal, your questions, and the intention and the idea, the reason why you would like to interview them. and then suggest some dates or some months or weeks, months ahead of time. Then see what their response is. Then based on that mutual confidence, you can. I would not say it's impossible, but definitely it is possible if you work hard, if you have the patience, if you have the commitment.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nehinpao. And this actually leads on to my second question, based on what you just said about patience as a researcher and persistence. To be patient and to be persistent, and also to have that love and passion for what you are actually researching on, the topic of your research. A combination of it is very, very important. But before I would go on to the second question for you, I just want to, for the audience, want to tell them that if you're watching this either on the Zoom chat box, or if you're watching it on YouTube, please feel free to share your questions, whatever questions you might have in your mind. Professor Tatiana Belusova, who is our newest professor here at JGU, joined early in the spring semester from all the way from Russia. She is the coordinator of this webinar today, where we are discussing Nehin Pao's journey from research to a scholarly book. So please feel free to share these questions in the chat box. And the last 15-20 minutes, we'll keep it for Q&A session. And Professor Tatiana is going to collect the questions from all of you and ask those questions to Professor Nehin Pao and Mr. Akash. Well, Nehin Pao, my second question to you is related to this entire issue of time, which connects with what you mentioned, patience and persistence. With regards to your book publications, can you give a rough idea to our student listeners, and maybe also some faculty, young faculty members, about a timeline, from the time you started your planning your research, doing your field work, to the time finally you publish the book. Often people, somewhere they get lost, in the process, and they might feel like it's rather taking too long. So if you can give an idea to the people based on your experience, I think that would be very helpful about how much time the entire process might take.
Okay, thank you. Before I answer that question, I just would like to add something to the previous discussion. One thing that also attracts potential interviewees, or let's say potential high profiles or people of high status, high caliber, who might be interested on your project is if you can also share with them that you have already have some kind of acceptance from, let's say, a reputed publisher. For example, Routledge is one of them. If you have that in mind, if you already have something that to share with them, to present with them, there are some high profile people or organizations who may take more serious about your work, because there are a lot of people who conduct interview but never, let's say, have that into publication in form. Therefore, there are people who are skeptical whether that would really come out of something that is of value. So therefore, it is important before you go on for interview or meet people, if you have something like a contract signed with a reputed producer like Routledge or OUP or maybe Cambridge and some others. So now coming to your question, it is difficult. It depends, but again, based on my experience, if I may say, at least a minimum of 3 years to 3 years to 4 5 years, three
Mm.
four 3 to 5 years is necessary for writing a book. The
Mhm.
reason why I say is that writing a book is not like it's a fiction where you just put together whatever comes to your mind and then you put there and you go to the publisher and get published. It's not like that. I think I believe that Akash also would be able to share from the publisher perspective. But one thing we have to remember is that first and foremost, we need to put together what we call a proposal, and each publisher has their own proposal where you answer all different sections of those proposal form. Then you send to the potential publisher. Then they look at. Sometimes this publisher may take just to even let's say go through your proposal. They may take maybe 2 3 months to maybe even a year or 2 years. It can take that long. But generally, road is pretty quick, and they take. I don't think just for the proposal they don't take more than 2 3 months. But then that's only the initial stage, because once you get your proposal, let's say approved or accepted, that doesn't mean that you are already officially, let's say, uh, ready for publication, because that's only what is that, a piece of a larger cake where you have to do a bigger work. For example, right after the acceptance of that proposal, the publisher may or may not be willing to give you a contract yet. They may or may not be willing to sign a contract with you yet, depending on which publisher you are and how well known you are, and how, let's say, widely you are considered as a scholar, an expert on that area. Some publishers are hesitant to sign a contract at the early stage before you have the final manuscript. But once you become an established scholar, publishers are a little bit flexible, trusting you if they believe you that you would deliver, let's say, a quality book or a quality manuscript. So from the proposal submission to acceptance takes, let's say, 3 months to 6 months. Then from there, you start putting together, you start doing, conducting or doing a literature review. Then from literature review means also that you have to have your research question, hypothesis, theoretical framework, things like that. Then once you are done with that, then you would start reaching out to, if you are working on, let's say, if your research is based on ethnographic study, you have to start contacting your potential interviewees. Then that may also take going there, collecting data, and then operationalizing or analyzing the data. That itself can take from 1 year to 2 years. And then we already have 2.5 to 3 years gone. Then once you're ready, it depends on person to person, but again, I'm just giving a rough estimate. Then once you are done with collecting data, and primary, secondary data, and literature review, and putting together data, you start writing now, and you start analyzing, and then you come up with your own analysis of the work that you're doing. And the purpose of writing a book or a journal article for that matter is that you need to contribute to the existing literature. If you are doing exactly what other people are doing, there is no value into your work. Then, so once you, let's say, incorporate all the primary data that you have collected from the field work, then it will take maybe about 6 months or so, let's say, putting together, incorporating, and let's say editing and revising. Then you submit. And normally for that, the publisher would take, again, approximately, from my understanding, from my personal experience, it could take from 3 months to 6 months for the publisher to get back to you. Then once they get back to you, it can be three responses, or it can be three, let's say, replies. One is outright rejection based on the reviewer's comments. They don't like, so even though we have agreed initially, the reviewers are so bad that we cannot carry forward this manuscript or this proposal. Number two is that the reviewers have proposed or have suggested major revision, or let's say minor revision. Based on that, you have to revise. Then it's very rare that your manuscript will be accepted without any revision. It's most of the time, 99% I would say, you have to revise somehow. Either it's a major one or a minor one. Then once you finish your revision, then you send it back to the publisher, which would take from there minimum 6 months for them to bring out in publication. So that's a timeline. That's what I'm saying. From 3 years to 6 years, I would say, for a quality book to come out. Again, Bosumi, I would like to emphasize here, I'm talking about a scholarly book, academic book. I'm not talking about commercial book, which you can publish in 1 month if you pay money. For this scholarly book, you never pay money. It's entirely based on the quality of your work.
True, true. I agree. And I'm sure this is going to be a good learning experience, especially for all the students who might be listening to this webinar right now. My second question, once again, is a connected question to you with regards to publication. How you went about choosing your publishers. You said you have published two books with Routledge, but you have published other books also with other publishers. How did you go about this process, as a scholar, as a researcher, in terms of selection of who you're going to approach for publication?
There are several, but let me talk about three reasons how and why I choose a publisher, a certain publisher. Let me start with a Routledge. The reason why I keep choosing or I chose Routledge is number one, of course, the most important reason I have chosen Routledge or Oxford is because of their global reputation. Because they have a global reputation, no doubt any book or any manuscript or that comes out with this Routledge or like OUP, Cambridge, these are highly rated and highly considered as a pure academic work. Therefore, because of its global reputation, that's number one. And the second reason is that I have been traveling around the world, many countries around the world, especially for academic conferences. Then I have heard people came and talked to me, people email me saying that, oh, Dr. Kipgen, I have read or I have seen your book in our library, which means that their market sector is also quite good. Because, for example, people from California or people from the Netherlands or people from London email me or said, oh, I have read your work. I saw your book in our library. So that's much as how these globally reputable publishers are having their network around the world. In fact, for example, when I went to International Study Association conference in Hong Kong a few years ago, my book was on display. Among hundreds and thousands of books, my book was selected as for display. So that was how much this publisher like Routledge has its reputation. So that's the second reason. And of course, the third reason is that uh, the way how they go through their peer review process. It's a very transparent and it's a very purely based on quality, the quality of the work. So and the back and forth conversation correspondence with Routledge is really good. And lastly, and not but not the least, is that I have chosen Routledge for this region. The fact that Routledge has usually published two different versions, two different editions. One with the global edition, what we call UK USA edition, and the other one is what they call South Asia edition. This South Asia edition is much cheaper than the global edition. So I mean, in the West, I think most of me you also went to Chicago, where in the West people don't mind buying a book for $600 or $500. But here in our part of the world, uh, if it becomes more than 1,000 rupees, or let's say 2 or 3,000 rupees, people generally don't tend to buy a book. Therefore, they make it very cheap. I mean, that is one advantage because you can reach out to many more people with these two different editions: one the global edition and one the South Asia edition. So these are the three, four reasons why I have chosen Routledge.
Excellent, excellent. That really explains very well, and it's good for young budding researchers and authors to know about these things in order to get informed about how they're going to make the selections. But keeping in mind both local and global audience and reach of the publisher. for very wide circulation of your scholarly work. Of course, any author, whether you're writing a book of fiction or you're writing a book based on rigorous research, your goal is to reach as many authors as possible, right? So definitely, it's a really smart choice. I totally agree with you. My next question to you is related to very much if you can identify, which there is no doubt about the fact that you have successfully completed a number of book manuscripts and taken it to the publication stage, and they are out there in the world. People are reading them, they're being displayed in conferences, they are being archived in different libraries around the world. Now, if I would ask you to identify the main factors, say for example, I don't want to put a number, two or three or four, but what are the main factors, personal factors, which assisted you in successful completion of your book projects, and what are the professional factors? If I would ask you, if you can identify those, that would be helpful. First the personal, and then or the professional, because personal, I think, is very important for all of us, even as professionals and academics. So please identify the personal factors first and then the professional.
Yeah, thank you. The personal factor I would say is that since I was in college, I would say, I have been wanting to become an international writer or globally recognized or renowned international writer. And, and, and of course, and I also wanted to be a political scientist, which I am today. So a combination of those two, let's say, always linger in my mind, saying that because once you become a renowned international writer, people recognize you, not even people who don't see you face to face. People start recognizing you, and let's say based on the kind of publications that you have made. So, so this is something that I have always wanted to become. It's not necessarily I wanted to publish on certain issues, but just want to be a renowned international writer. That pushed me to the edge, saying that if I wanted to become international writer, I had to, let's say, work harder. I mean, much harder than the average people. I mean, you asked me about my wife. Definitely, this support comes from my wife and my family too. Without their support, I would not be able to achieve all what I have achieved. You have, in the beginning, you have read out the number of publications I have had around the world. These things were as let's say as a testament to how I wanted to become an international writer or a renowned a global international writer. So this is something. It doesn't have to be. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to do with what topic, what let's say what subject I want to write. It's just that I always wanted to become somebody who is known as international writer around the world, and people, let's say, learn something from my writing. This is, I think, I would put that as a personal, and of course, in for this, I mean, I. Always say, I mean, would like to thank my wife, my kids, and my family, and my colleagues who have always supported me, and that's pushed me to the edge to become an international writer. And on a professional side, I would say that this I have been telling my students and colleagues as well, the younger scholars. I have been telling them that, especially in the Western world, unless you have quality publication, you cannot be considered as a renowned international scholar. It is publication which determines the quality of who you are as an academic. This is completely different from, let's say, popular writings like newspapers and some magazines, but I'm talking about peer-reviewed journal articles and peer-reviewed academic books. So by saying that or by doing that, I want people around the world to recognize me, or let's say, at least to know my work on certain area. For example, I'm an expert on Southeast Asia, which specializes in Myanmar and now I have been extending lately to the East Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, and of course my latest book being the South China Sea dispute. So I would love a younger generation, not just younger generation, but also let's say students who are going to be researchers or scholars someday. Read the book, my works, and said, "Oh, according to Dr. Kipgan, this is what." So I would like to be there. I mean, my name. I would like to leave my legacy as an expert on Southeast Asian studies as well as Myanmar studies, and of course Asia Pacific or the Indo-Pacific. I mean, these are the two personal and I would say professional regions which push me or which always kept telling me that despite several challenges and difficulties, I should work harder and not just like the ordinary people. That makes me, to get to where I am today.
Excellent, excellent. Very inspiring. Thank you so much, Nehen Pao. Once again, what you said just now leads me on to the next question for you before I move on to asking question to our publisher. I can see that clock is ticking away, but this is the last question to you before I move on to ask question to Mr. Chakrabarti is what has been your major challenge as a scholar and as an author, published author, in this entire journey, in this entire process. Can you recall and share with us one major challenge that you faced and how you overcame that challenge?
I think one major challenge would be that when you would like to write a quality book and then you don't have the enough resources. When I say enough resources, I'm talking about let's say for example financial resources, or you don't have, let's say, enough human resources to assist you in, let's say, putting together data, or let's say supporting you morally. For example, your kids are I have two kids. When your kids are fallen, let's say, ill. I mean, in fact, when I was writing this my latest book, my wife was about to give birth to our second son. Then I had to return from overseas just to be with her for 2 weeks only. Then after she delivered our second baby, then I had to ask permission from my wife again, and then had to return back to the field to collect data. I think that would be one most, let's say, significant or important memory or challenges that I have faced in recent times. Of course, there are other regions, financial resources, but I think this is, I would say, it comes down to my family, where my wife was wonderful. She supported me. She said, "Go ahead and go to the field and collect your data. You have to finish the work that you're doing." So even though she was just delivering our second baby boy, then I had to go for another trip to collect data. I think I would put that as one most important difficulty or challenge that I have faced during, excuse me, during the time of my research. But of course, there are several other difficulties, including financial resources, when you don't have enough to visit many countries that you would love to visit. For example, I wanted to visit all Asian countries when I was writing the South China Sea dispute book, because there are 6 countries also who are in dispute. I would like to visit all countries, but I didn't have enough support. Of course, I'm always thankful to Jinder University for the Research Grants Committee for supporting me financially. But I would have loved to visit more countries, which would be give me more, let's say, credential or more data to, let's say, strengthen the argument that I make in my book. But again, these are personal as well as financial. I would say these are two constraints or two main challenges as a researcher which I have faced in the past few years.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nenpa, for sharing this. And we really appreciate all the sacrifices you have personally made and all your family members to leave this legacy behind for scholars in the future to refer to. I'll now go to our publisher with my next question, Mr. Akash Chakrabarti. Thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us today for this webinar discussion. As the senior commissioning editor of Routledge, I would like to ask you, do you see a sufficient representation and coverage of such, regional issues that our colleague Nehin Pao has been researching on, or, of course, you have published a book. It does show that you are interested in these regional issues, but what is the level of interest on these regional issue vis-a-vis more global issue as a global publisher? So if you could share that with us.
Uh, I mean, thank you for this question. This is actually a very, very interesting question in the sense that we always have this thing about what is global and what is local, and whether they are interconnected and how they are interconnected. There is an example that we give to all authors that we say as a classic example of great writing, and that this is a book of there's a book of microhistory called "The Cheese and the Worms" by Carlo Ginzburg. I'm sure most of you are aware of it. But what it does is it describes the world of a Flemish farmer, and it describes 16th, 17th century Europe through the life of that farmer. And that, I think, is a fabulous example of how, how both the global and the local are enmeshed. What I would say is there's space for both. And obviously, if you have to write about global issues, it's important, this thing. But local issues also make a lot of interesting reading, and it's these things that kind of make up what is essentially global, because they are somewhere interconnected, those nodal points that uh, you know uh, kind of shape a lot of things. So I mean, there's apart from that, what I would also say is that uh, before it's not more about whether it's local or global, but rather, as an author, you need to think about whether this is a book that's who are you writing this book for. That's the most important part of it. Who is your audience? Like, whether you're writing this for a student, whether you're writing this for a what you call a specialist audience, whether this is time sensitive, because these are things that all publishers kind of need to understand, and what do you call plan for. Nenpao said a few moments back, and something that you also said is that uh, filling up the process of filling up the proposal form. So it's very important that you fill up that book proposal form in a very careful way, in kind of telling how what are the things that you need to fill up, what is it exactly that makes your work unique, and how are you having that conversation around different things in the world at that time. So I mean, that's a short answer. That I mean, we could go on and on for this, so I clarify this is a very short answer in that sense.
True, true. It's all interconnected, the
Yes.
local and the global. Very well said, with great examples. This leads me on to my next question for you as a publisher. Um, what do you actually look for in a proposal as a publisher? Of course, we have very nicely answered the question related to the global and local, but but in terms of topic,
Yeah.
what kind of topics you look for in terms of recent trends, or especially for academic publishing, what kind of, and particularly broadly in the social sciences, and particularly in your specific area, Mehan Power specific area, which is international relations. What's the latest trend of do you look for only publishing topics that are trendy, so to say, in that sense, or what kind of topics, what kind of themes are something that you're interested in publishing?
I mean, who wouldn't be interested in publishing stuff that's trendy? It makes very interesting reading, and there's a guaranteed market for the book. But that apart, we there are also a lot of staples and a lot of you know, let's say, like, for example, I work in the area of politics and international relations, and a lot of my work, a lot of the work that we kind of publish around there are deal with public policy, public processes, which you will see a lot of books that we're doing on. I mean, for the last, let's say, we've been in India for the last 15 to 20 years, and you would see that we've been publishing close to, like, a book on India's electoral processes quite regularly. So and these are very strong data oriented stuff, that kind of actually become reference points for other books, and more, let's say, more uh, what you call the more trendy books that many people read, like, uh, there's also this thing is that we, as scholarly publishers, we tend to anticipate a lot of the trends that are going to come up later on. For example, this is we've been working on a lot of topics, for example, in digital politics and all, which are now becoming very popular. But there have been books that we've published over the last 6 7 years that kind of foreground this issue. So, yeah, for example, we had a book on social media and politics that was, like, 4 or 5 years ago, that we published, and now we are seeing a proliferation of, how social media is affecting not just our elections but elections the world over. So it's a very interesting kind of this. So there is no trend, in the sense, like, there's no every topic is important and good. What we look for is that how well, as you said, we look at the interconnectedness within the title, how well it's speaking to other aspects of it. uh, Often what happens is that, uh, uh, you become so dragged, people get dragged into, or authors get dragged into a small aspect of it, that they start forgetting that those small interconnections within the larger topics, that they actually hold, those small kind of nerve joints, as you can call it. So, I mean, then, for example, now again, there's a book, I mean, India, China and US, these have been, again, very trendy topics across for a long time. So they've always given enough to think about. There's always the Himalayan, this thing. Now the Himalayas have suddenly become a very, what you call, talking point amongst most scholars in IR. But we've been publishing books on the politics of the Himalayas and this for a long time now. So there's no good time and bad time to publish, but as long as it's a good solid work, we are happy to publish it. But at the same time, yes, it must speak to the larger questions in the field.
Hmm. Of course, especially for a scholarly book.
Yeah.
So this leads me on to the next question to you is, what role does, the researcher, the author's own publication track record or institutional affiliation, and also, the peer review comments,
Yeah.
play in your selection of the proposal? Uh,
So I mean, the proposal is a very interesting stage, but the author actually has, there is, I mean, obviously there are some, there'll be authors who are very high profile authors and this thing, but uh, I would say that it has very little to do with our decision to publish. In that sense, we treat our authors equally in that sense when it comes to publishing. What we have seen among a lot of authors is that, often there is very little, what you call, very in the sense, like, we've got very good proposals from young scholars. In fact, we went on to publish a book on the battlefields of Imphal and Kohima, uh, which was written by someone who had not even done their PhD.
mm,
So, and he was an economics graduate. He's this thing, he had an interest in history and during the Second World War. So, I mean, and he just wrote a book. He said, like, I think this is interesting, and we got down to a chat, and we found that, yes, he has some interesting points to make. And, when we actually sent it out for review, and the reviewer came back to us saying that, who's this person, like, this is the first battlefield history of India, like, by an Indian. So, I mean, and you feel very what you call vindicated at such moments. And it's a great thing for an author as well, that they're actually doing something very interesting. And it does not have to be someone who holds a PhD or an MPhil or something, but anyone who approaches their subject systematically can actually write a book. But it needs to have a certain way of there is a certain way of going about it. And in that context, the question you bring up about peer reviews is very important, because for scholarly publishers, peer reviews is the lifeblood, because that's what that's how we curate our content. And the content that you receive, or when you receive a Routledge book, you're sure that it comes with a certain quality, and that's the quality that we ensure when we are doing those peer reviews. And more often than not, we've seen peer reviews actually improve even really good book proposals and book projects, because often it alerts authors, maybe, hey, there's this new work coming out, maybe you can check this out. That's just that bit. Or there are certain archives or something that where you might not have access to, or you might not know of, and they might point you towards that. There have been several instances. In fact, we have this question for many, what you call, in our reviewers guidelines: would you like to be put in touch with the author? And often, and in some cases, they have often said yes, like, what you call, like, we would like to work with them to improve their this thing. So they often, many of these reviewers, like, they reach out to these authors and say that maybe you should look at this, maybe, this is how you should frame your methodology. You should change your frame of reference from this, or maybe you cut down a few chapters here, this is looking too bulky, taking away from the focus of the book. So these are very important things. And more than that, the peer review is the first reading of the manuscript as a whole. uh, Oftentimes, because you're, as an author, you're writing for a really long period of time. Let's say 2 years, as Negin Pao said, Negin, 2 years to 6 years, it could be something between that. And it's really close to your heart. There's this thing that you've become too attached to it. uh, wh- what a reviewer's comments brings is a bit of objectivity, like, that, maybe you should look, it just gives you that extra bit of this thing. I'm not saying that, that uh, being attached to your work is wrong, but it's a good thing, actually. But at the same time, there is this need to, like, look at it from a distance to see how well it stands as a structure.
True, true. It always helps, another pair of
Yeah.
eyes looking at your work, and they look at it from a very different perspective, a fresh
Abs-
perspective. It always helps to improve. I personally totally agree with you. The peer review
yeah.
process has often helped improving the content itself. Now, the thing that I wanted to ask you, the next
Hmm.
question that I had for you, this is the question I already asked Nain Pao, but
Yes.
he spoke it from his author's perspective. I would like to ask you from the publisher's perspective, if you could tell our audience a little bit about the process, from of the publication process from the time
Absolutely.
for Nehin Pao, I asked his journey from the time he thought about his research and did field work. But with regards to you as a publisher, from the time you get a proposal to the
Yes.
time that you publish the book manuscript into and release it into the world, if you can just give a, you know,
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. Uh, you know, the first point of contact for with a publisher is usually, let's say, a book proposal. Often you're sending out, you check out, your an editor's bio and see, okay, this is where your work fits in very well, and you kind of write to them saying that, let's can I work with you on this, and this is the basic brief extract. A lot of publishers, most publishers will have a book proposal form which kind of asks you to fill it up, and this thing. I'll come to that a little later, but first I'll give a little bit of a brief breakup of the process. Uh, we look at the book proposal form, we kind of see how well it fits in within our lists. Let's say I'll take a look at the list, and maybe, I think that, okay, this doesn't sit well with my list. Maybe my colleague can work with it. So I can pass it on to a colleague. Or there are a lot of specialized publishers who might not want to publish a certain kind of book. So they'll say that maybe, you should look at someone else. So that's it. But if it fits with the process, we take the proposal itself for a peer review, and based on the peer reviews, often we can offer a contract. Again, even during the proposal peer reviews, there's this first there's a bunch of recommendations and revisions that the reviewers suggest, saying that it's a good proposal or a bad proposal, and don't give them a contract. Or it's a good proposal, definitely worth taking forward, and but so many, maybe they can change their this focus from, maybe chapter 2 and 3 are not required at all, or they haven't looked at this aspect of the entire thing, or some new let's say in the case of politics, a new policy has come up, a new thing has come up. If you're probably writing from the if you're an educationist, you're talking about some new pedagogy has already come out. So these are things that uh, uh, kind of this thing. So based on that, we share the reviews with the author, saying that this is the review, how would you like to take it forward. Then they share a revision plan, and based on that, we kind of offer a contract. So once the contract is offered, we receive the manuscript, and the manuscript is then again sent to a reviewer. We try and send it to one of the older reviewers, but there is no guarantee that they would have, because review is also a very time taking process. And not everyone is free or available, or may not want to take it up again. So they the reviewer kind of goes through the manuscript again, kind of comments what kind of whether again it stands, whether it can pass the test or not. And once it passes muster, we kind of tell the author that, look, good, these are the suggestions that have come. Maybe you need to rework certain, if it's if it's the best bit is that there are very little changes, minor here and there, please go ahead and make those changes. There could be some major changes recommended even at that point, wherein you have to again revisit the manuscript and reorient some of your arguments. So that might actually happen. And even and once that is done, they send us the manuscript in a certain specified format. We require manuscripts in a certain specified way, and we always request our authors to kind of send it to us according to a style sheet. Because what's important is that if the manuscript is uniform in this thing, it helps even the copy editor and everyone, the others involved in the process, to kind of look through it. So in our case, our production teams are based in the UK. So it's a centralized production. So we have offices in across many locations in Singapore, in US, in UK, and even in Africa, in South Africa. So across, the manuscripts kind of keep going there, and they what you call they get in touch with the author, set up a schedule that you'll be receiving the queries at this point, you'll be receiving your proofs at this point, whether they'll be doing the index or not, and how do you want this thing. So giving your time schedule, and also letting you know that this is around the time they expect the book to be published. So more or less, once it moves into the production stage, the book moves almost on autopilot, and often at I think Nain Pao will kind of not say it, but probably at breakneck speed, too fast for many for many people's comfort. But it's a very thorough process. It's a very thorough process, and it takes a lot of concentration and hard work. At this point, I would also like to say that it's uh, like you might be seeing me as one face of the publisher, but believe me, there are several of us involved in this entire process. It's not we are not like a monolith, but like rather kind of so many people, so many people who are working on the ground to actually make this possible. So from right down to the person who transports books or even stacks up books. So that's how critical each function is, that certain books reach at certain times. And so here's that. But what I also wanted to bring to your attention here is about the book proposer, and why it's probably one of the most important part of the entire publishing process, because this is where you make the first contact with your publisher, and often first impressions do matter. So this is something very very important, and let's say pertinent. So I'll quickly go through some bits that where, when a lot of scholars will kind of want to know, and kind of think of when they're approaching a publisher. The first bit is always the nothing can take away from the importance of a good title. So this is a digital age, and this is also a very what you call where discoverability matters, and everything depends on keywords and search engine optimization. So always try and use always try and use keywords in your title. It becomes, especially for scholarly works, it becomes very very difficult to be indexed or cataloged properly if like we all have this tendency to think that uh, you know maybe we should have a very poetic title up front, and then maybe explain the whole thing. But what we've been seeing over time is that like direct titles, like for Nayan Pao's book, The Politics of South China Sea Disputes, we settled on that, nothing else, because that that's something that will immediately get noticed, and it'll help in cataloging it. Very very importantly, I think each of us must have come across titles in the library, whenever you would go, that books being cataloged in the wrong section, and you realize how damaging for that is for a book. So especially at a time when at least we alone publish 7,000 books a year. So imagine that's a what how many more other publishers are also publishing in this way. How important it becomes to kind of get that 15 seconds of fame. So to catch the to readers attention, so that becomes very important. The second bit is obviously the statement to state your aims very very clearly, the main themes and objectives of the of your book. uh, it helps to give a good 1 or 2 paragraph summary of the book, not more than that, because because what happens is, if you write too much, a lot your authors might your publisher might just lose interest. And remember that this is a document that's being circulated across departments. So a lot of people, lot of, let's say, it might go to a marketing person, it might go to someone with the sales, in the sales team. So to try and write it very simply, so that it's something that everyone understands, and at the same time you preserve the nuance of your arguments. So give them a basic idea that this is what the book is about, and we think, and why you think it needs to be published. So that's basically uh, what do you call, listing out the USPs of your work. But after that, it is only after that that you should probably go in for a detailed synopsis and chapter summaries, which we ask for, because these are things that gets shared with peer reviewers. Because when you're sharing it with peer reviewers, you're talking to a specialist audience, and peer reviewers will want more, like more details, more what you call, more like to see if you're familiar with the latest in the field or not. So that you have to show them that familiarity. Also, you have to clearly identify, let your peer reviewers know at this point in the details, what is the basic structure of the book, what are the frame of references, what is the methodology that you're employing in kind of in kind of doing it, whether it's like a study based on primary material, archival material, or let's say based largely on secondary material. We do have a lot of books that do depend on secondary material as well. So excuse me. So that's very important as well. So you kind of the thing. Also, it's important to also identify in what I have meant to say in the first part is meant tell your publisher immediately what kind of book this is. Is this a monograph? Is this an edited collection? Is this what you call a textbook, or is this like, let's say a critical introduction or a short introduction that you mean for, like, let's say a certain specialist audience. So these are things that kind of that you need to kind of outline to your authors, because so so here two critical things emerge. One is putting forward the USPs of your work very clearly, and the second is a clear understanding of your audience. And these two things will get your publisher's attention if you have that in mind. uh, After that, once you are aware of that, and you've listed out the chapter abstracts and everything. You need to kind of also review your main competing titles in the area. So what are the main titles that you think that could compete with your book? And I think a uh, authors tend to write that my book has no competing material, and often that is not true. We all know academic work is like, you're building up on someone else's work. I mean, it's like, it's like a whole repository that we are always building on. And it's important to acknowledge that. And if you don't, the reviewer will do it for you and will not be very kind about it. So that's so
Scholarly humility
yes.
is needed.
Absolutely, not just scholarly humility, but also awareness. It also says that immediately someone will say, so you haven't read so and so. So
Right.
that could land you in big trouble. Also, you timeline. You need to mention, like, when do you want to kind of, like, whether you're doing it for 2020, 2021. That's how people, so even publishers have to plan and schedule. We are working on let's say on numerous projects at the same time, and often our interest, while we want to work on as many as we can, there's also a limit, even more so now that we are confined to our homes, because we don't have a lot of the things that we kind of will be able to this thing. So uh, but it's important that you also mention the timeline, so we get a fair idea of what works and what. But there are also some other things that you need to check on. One is the use of copyright materials. And by copyright material, I mean a lot of things. It's not just like, how, whether you're using like a pre-published essay or an article of yours, but a lot of other things. I wonder if many of you remember this whole episode of the monkey selfie. There was this monkey which picked up camera in the photographer had left the camera, and he picked up the camera and took photographs of itself. And when the when the cameraman actually found it and, like, tried to kind of sell the photograph, animal rights organizations came and kind of, you know what you call, sued him, because that they felt that that was an infringement of copyright. It was a case that was settled out of court, but that's an important indicator of how important understanding copyright is. So anything that you take a screenshot of, let's say, from this thing, cannot be used. Anything that can be publicly viewed may not be in copyright, is not in public domain. That's something that we all need to understand. Let's say, for example, in many cases, in many places, especially in the West, you have to ask permission to even from people to even take a street photograph. So it's a very interesting thing. You cannot reproduce it without a certain all permissions being in place. uh, I'm saying this more out of this thing because, and that the same applies to a lot of things. Say, let's say you're working in film studies or something. So there is always an argument that you can use it for academic discussion, but more often the case is that you cannot use it because you will necessarily have to seek permission from the production company to use it in your work. So that's another important. The other bit is that if you're using archival material, let's say you're working in some library or this thing, they've given you use of archives, so it's only right that you ask permission from them to use their archival material. So it's important. In what I'm saying is that you need to understand uh, uh, what you call how much you kind of you acknowledge your sources duly, and also when you're taking, let's say you're taking a picture from another book or something, it's not just important to just cite it. It's not often it, but also important to take permission, due permission from the publisher or the author, whoever is it is in that, whoever the copyright holder is in that case, to kind of reproduce that map or this thing. And I use the word map because that's something that I'm coming to next. We have to be very careful about using maps. And, as scholars and students of many IR who might be here, I mean, we know that borders are very fraught and this thing. So you have to be very careful about what maps you use and what uh, what you're depicting on this thing. Often we advise authors not to use maps with scales because you could immediately get into an issue with
Okay, it looks like our guest Akash Chakraborty, the publisher, his screen was frozen and he is out of the webinar room briefly. I can see Nenbao is still here. Maybe there's some connectivity issue at Akash's end. We are actually over time already, but Tatiana already messaged me. She has got 3 questions already, and I also saw a few questions in the queue. Tatiana, there were a few questions in the Q&A box also, which I copied and pasted in the chat box. So if some of the questions, Nehinpao, you can respond till Akash can come back again. We are running a little overtime. I knew it will run a little overtime. It does always. Tatiana, please go ahead asking the questions from students.
I actually have 2 questions for Professor Niginpao and 1 question for Mr. Akash. So I will start with Professor Niginpao. The question from Jishan Chaudhary. He asked the following question: how to choose a research topic? Because there are so many events simultaneously taking place around the world, and there is countless data and information available on various issues around the globe. Therefore, how does one goes about finalizing one's research agenda?
Okay, do you want me to respond or wait for the second question?
I think you I mean, it's up to you, but you could answer if possible.
Okay, let me answer that, right? Uh, I have been telling students the importance of choosing the right topic, and definitely that's very important. Akash is coming back, so we ask him to continue, or
Okay, Akash has come
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
Uh,
Sorry, there was a power
Akash,
failure.
yeah, yeah, I could understand there was some
Yeah,
issue at your end because
yeah,
suddenly your screen froze and you disappeared. So we actually brought
yeah.
forward Nehin Pao and Tatiana, and Tatiana was asking some question from the students. But before we get to that, why don't you finish what you were saying, and then we'll get to the student questions.
Sure. I mean, I was almost done actually. So again, what's important is that you maps. What I was saying about maps and this thing. So be careful about what maps you use. How often we suggest to get maps redrawn. So that's a very important part. Uh, and the last bit I would like to highlight is the importance of writing, because I mean to paying attention to your language skills. That's something that can happen over time, and work. It's important to work on language skills and this thing. There is often I've seen even the best of authors actually often engage a freelancer on their side just to kind of go through their manuscripts and iron out the issues that may have crept up. As I said, it's very easy to get what do you call easy to get attached to your work, and you often don't understand maybe the problems maybe in your argument, or you get into those fallacies while making those arguments, or some basic mistakes that creep in while you're writing. So
Right.
it's an important process, and it's important to ensure that you're also kind of what do you call paying attention to the kind of language that you're working in. It's important also keep I mean, dictionaries are now available in hand, very on online, so you have them for ready reference. Also, I would suggest that all many of you, like look at on the style manuals, that those are very important, important to kind of look at, because this kind of ensures that you submit your work well. A badly submitted manuscript, remember, it often reviewers get very angry with a badly submitted manuscript. So more than probably your publisher, your reviewers are going to lambast you for submitting a bad manuscript. So be when you're submitting something, be careful you're submitting it well. So
Thank you. Thank you so much, Akash. I did have another question for you, but this is a question which relates more to the students. So I would first allow my colleague Tatiana to ask the questions she has already gathered from students. And then, if they have not asked this question yet, this question is connected to converting a thesis into a book, which we discussed before. But let Tatiana ask the questions first, and then I'll come back again. Tatiana, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think Professor Nikin Pao already started answering the question.
Would you mind repeating it quickly because
Yeah,
Akash was not here?
definitely, definitely. How to choose, that was from Jishan Chaudhary. How to choose a research topic, because there are so many events simultaneously taking place around the world, and there is countless data and information available on various issues around the globe. Therefore, how does one goes about finalizing one's research agenda?
Okay. Nehinpao. Nehinpao, you have to unmute.
Okay, all right, sorry. See, there are a few things that we should remember. I mean, which is what is important for choosing a topic. First and foremost, what is important is the topic must be an interest to you. You must have an interest on that area or that issue. I mean, if you work on something which does not interest you, it will not lead you anywhere. So, first and foremost, what is important is a topic that is interest to you. And again, that doesn't mean that everything that interests you has to be, let's say, a priority, because something you might be interested heavily on it. But again, if that's not an interest to your readers or potential readers, or maybe scholars and researchers in your field, you not find readers, even the publisher may not be interested in publishing that idea or that manuscript. So, of course, the first thing is your interest, and second is, let's say, the prevailing let's say situation of, let's say, if you are IR student or political science student, look at what is happening around the world, what is the latest information or the latest development development on your interest subject. So you combine between your interest versus, let's say, the potential readers or potential, let's say, public or audience that you are trying to address. And again, besides these two important topics, what is also important is that will you be adding, let's say, something to the existing knowledge or literature? If you are just, let's say, reproducing what's already available in newspapers, magazines, or let's say some books or journal articles, I think that is something that is not worth wasting your time. And again, at some point, the reviewer or the publisher may reject your proposal. So it is also important what kind of contribution you think you can make in your research. I mean, by saying that, it is important you do exhaustive or let's say extensive research, a literature review before you get you finalize what kind of topic you would like to do. Three things. Let me repeat. First and foremost, it must be a topic of your interest. But again, that should not be the only region you decide a topic. You must also consider your public, your audience, and what is the latest development on that topic. And finally, you would have to also look at what kind of contribution you can make on toward the existing literature. If you think you can't make any contribution toward the existing literature, you have to stop right now and look for something where you believe you can contribute. When I say that, it is very important if you can, let's say, have access to or try to have access to primary data, which has not been, let's say, discussed earlier in the existing literature. That would have definitely what kind of contribution knowledge you are contributing to the existing literature.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Negin Pao. I have one more question, if I may, to you. Given the fact that geopolitical issues in the South China Sea have been constantly developing and many events take place there as we speak, what are your academic plans in this regard? Are you planning to remain with this topic, with this subject, and publish perhaps more books?
Uh, at the moment, I don't plan to publish a book as such, but I am writing journal articles. As we speak, for example, at the moment, I begin to write on the role of Indonesia. I mean, which is officially a non-claimant state. But again, in recent times, Indonesia has become involved heavily with China on the Natuna Island or the waters. So I'm looking at the role of Indonesia in the South China Sea dispute. Definitely, I'm also looking at more articles on other claimant states, and of course, China and also Taiwan. But it is not for a book project, but rather it is going to be peer-reviewed journal articles. Yes, definitely. I will also be writing newspaper articles and journal articles, and I will continue to stay on this topic in the foreseeable future. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That sounds wonderful and very exciting indeed. And now the question to Mr. Akash. Just a second. Yeah. Actually, it is related to the previous one. Due to the rapid changes taking place both regionally and globally, arguably more rapid than before in history, hasn't it become more challenging for the publisher to keep a track of these changes and reflect on them in publications on a timely basis?
That of course is a challenge, but that's also why we kind of have peer reviews at the same time, because it's important to this thing. While a lot of changes might be happening, it's also important to understand that not everything will impact qualitatively on a subject. So it's important that those right we take. It's important to publish the right kind of work than to publish indiscriminately. So that's precisely the, I mean.
I understood. Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Dr.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Dr.
Tatiana, and also for taking the question from our students to the author and the publisher. I would like to ask the last question for this session, and this question, once again, on behalf of the students only, something I would like to ask our publisher. he talked about the style of writing, that it's very important to be mindful of the style guide. For every publishing house has its own style guide. Okay, now taking into consideration that there is a lot of publication expectation, on students, doctoral students, like doctoral students are now required to also publish peer-reviewed journal articles out of their doctoral thesis. Now suppose I'm a doctoral student and I have already published a couple of journal articles, peer-reviewed journal articles out of my thesis, but at the same time I would also like to publish my thesis in the form of a book. Now, I have already published a few articles out of the thesis. Is it still possible to publish the thesis in the form of a book?
We don't publish, in the sense like it is not advisable to publish a thesis as it is, because a thesis is by its own nature something that you're writing where you're being examined. So you kind of have to show that how much you've read, you've kind of grappled with a lot of sources and a lot of ideas, and a lot of previous work in the field, in that sense. But a book is a much different proposition. A book is more like a conversation. So it's very important that you make that distinction while uh, you know uh, while you're converting your thesis into a book. So I mean, you have to definitely dumb down on the use of like technical language, because you have to assume that this is not going to be always the more, let's say, jargons you use, the more difficult it is going to be to make your work accessible. And also you must remember that you're talking to people as equals when you're writing a book, not, let's say, you're not writing for your professor, or you're not writing for your guide, but you're writing to the world as an equal. And it's essential that the tone and the work that you write assumes that quality when you're presenting it in a book form. So it becomes accessible. There is a kind of a structural and organic unity in the kind of work that you do. So often you'll see a lot of topics and a lot of ideas that are there within a thesis, and which probably will need to be developed further when you're going to write a book. So it necessarily may not become just one book, but when you start really exploring your thesis, you kind of you start seeing that the various possibilities it has. So it's important to understand your own thesis as well. And for that, I would suggest taking a break from your thesis for at least a year or a year and a half, mine it for articles, so that you understand the scope of your thesis. So that's important. Also, Negin Pao spoke a while back about the importance of field work. So you'd be having a lot of collecting a lot of data when you're doing your field work and this thing, and you'll be presenting almost all of it while you're doing your thesis. But when you're writing a book, probably that's not required. So you need to understand which data you're going to use, and how you're going to weave the story. There'll be a lot of tables and graphs and things that will have to be woven into uh, an understandable, accessible language for for your readers. And not everybody is interested in the dire details of what happened here and what happened the next day. So it's there. Also, stuff like methodology, let's say, uh, what do you call methodology, and long quotations that you usually use, they will have to go. Quotations is another aspect of copyright that you need to be careful of when you're writing a book. You can't use more than, like, you more than, let's say, 300 to 400 words of it from an entire work, and much less actually from that. And what also happens at the same time is that you need to understand that uh, you know poetry, something that you might use, poetry requires permission. Even to quote a line of poetry requires permission. So you have to be aware of those things as well. So you have to be very careful as how you present things. So a book requires much more awareness when you're publishing this thing. So and also the thing is that there's obviously a kind of market restriction that a book places on you, but also we see it, you can choose to see it as an opportunity, in the sense that if you can present your story around your data well, then you have a very good you can have a very good book that actually makes an impact. So these are some basic aspects of what you're doing, but the idea is to kind of look at your thesis and try and understand your own thesis, and look at the idea and engage with the ideas within them, to see how far you can take them.
Okay. Thank you so much, Akash, for answering this question. So, definitely, these are two very different kind of writing style: writing a thesis and writing a book. And necessary changes needs to be made if someone is thinking of, putting a book together out of a thesis work.
Mostly, can I add one line there?
Yes, yes.
I think Akash may remember that my first book wrote, let's say, so it's not, I mean, I absolutely understand what Akash says, but it's not impossible to publish your dissertation work as a book. I mean, in book form. But again, definitely there must be drastic changes, modifications. You cannot use the same data or book or the style that you use for your thesis in a book. But definitely it is possible to convert your thesis into book, because I did that, and Akash was my editor, for which we published my first book,
No, I'm not
Democratizing
saying.
Myanmar. I understand. I'm just trying
I'm
to add
saying.
to, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's always there's more than you can kind of this thing. Often we often say that maybe you'll find meet for 2 or 3 books from your thesis. So that's something that many people choose to ignore, and later on, many people kind of realize, many authors realize that, hey, I could have done this, I could have done that. I mean, there are so many ideas when you're working on your thesis, but it's often you when you're writing a book, you have to look at the organic unity of your work. So that's what I meant to say.
Mhm, mhm. So, and suppose, a related question to both of you. As I said, suppose a doctoral student who has already published a few articles coming out of peer-reviewed journal articles coming out of the thesis work, um, and would like to use some of the data that has been already published while writing these
Mhm.
articles. So, he or she will definitely need to seek permission, copyright permission, to for that to be used in the book, right?
If the data has been collected by the author or this thing, then that should not be a problem. And if they're using the articles or something that they want to reuse, or even substantially kind of revise and reuse, then they will need to kind of what you call seek permission. Often for their own work, it's not much of a problem. uh, and even journals do not create much of a there shouldn't be any problem at all. But if it's for an edited volume, then copyright fees and other things might be involved. But again, this depends on journal to journal and how things kind of work.
Right.
And Masumi, if I may add, my book with Oxford University Press, I definitely, I mean, it's relevant to your question. I use some of my previous works or previous publications, and definitely, though, I mean, you need permission from, let's say, the earlier publisher. If it was already published in a journal, you need permission, written permission from them. That permission may not be printed in the book, but the publisher needs to keep with them in case something happens. So definitely, if it's directly substantially taken from your the other one, you need permission. Yes, a written permission.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nehenpa. We have actually ran half an hour. It's exactly 6:30 now. Very, very comprehensive and enriching discussion. I'm sure this discussion is going to be useful for a number of our students and also our faculty who are interested in research and publishing. Thank you, Mr. Akash Chakraborty
Thank you.
from
My pleasure.
Rutledge, for accepting our invitation and joining. Thank you, my colleague Tatiana, for putting this together. As a takeaway from this discussion, I think for the students, I would like to say that it's very important for you to identify your passion. And as Nehin Pao has highlighted right at the very beginning, it's a long term process, the process of doing research, really rigorous quality research, and then putting it in the form of a book. It's a long term process, long term engagement. Until and unless you're really passionate about it, you love it, and you are persistent and patient, it's you're not going to make the journey. So it's a journey which is not easy, and it's a long journey, but if you really love it, you are going to enjoy the journey, right, Nehenpa
Absolutely,
and
absolutely,
Akash?
yeah,
This much
absolutely.
I can say. So thank you all for joining us to know about this journey from research to scholarly book publishing. The recording will be there in YouTube, or you can go back, those of you who have missed, and will listen to it, and probably also send more questions to our publisher and Nehan Pao later on. Have a very good evening, all of you.
You too.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Thank
you
thank
so
you
you.
much.
very much.
Bye.